thanks for the great intro. You've given everything away, so hopefully you can go forwards from this and know everything about kind of onboarding DevSecOps. Now, part of the thing of trying to make this process simpler is about trying to think about the steps that you would have to make and the changes or things that you probably already have that you're just going to re-adopt. You can see my LinkedIn and my Twitter at the bottom. If you would be able to, connect me on LinkedIn, I'd love that, because connections is very good for my ego. I've managed to reach over COVID times I think about 3 years ago that was on 500 plus. So that's, personal goal, a lifestyle, a marker in my life. And I'm a principal in cloud DevOps and security at Slalom Build, which I have the t-shirt on. So I'd also love any photos because this could be very good for my internal profile in a large company. Thank you very much. So what I do generally as a consultant, I kind of talk to people about things a lot. I'm on a lot of video calls. I invest a lot of time in my makeup for video calls. So I apologise if I don't look quite as good as I look in video calls in person. It's because I haven't been in 3 hours of makeup before turning up today. Now, when we think of kind of security as a concept, there is no real way that you're able to swallow that security problem, pizza, whole. Because as with most good pizzas, you have to slice it up into specific parts so you can gobble it down. I'd be amazed. It is possible to eat a pizza if you fold it in the right way and then basically just turn it into a stacked burger, like a pizza stacked burger, but I wouldn't advise it. So the easiest way, similarly to deal with security, is to think of it in smaller chunks and how we can look at achieving those chunks as part of a larger concept of working. And the two concepts I'm trying to put across as well at the same time is to think that generally in my security head, and what I talk to people about generally, is that internal things are about trust. Generally, I trust internal things to the extent that I do trust them. External things, they're much riskier. And I'll put this in pizza terms. So if you are allergic to anchovies, right, and someone in your house cooks you a pizza and you say, I'm allergic to anchovies, and they go, I haven't put anchovies on it, then you're probably much more likely to trust that they haven't put any anchovies on your pizza than if they're external and you're going, have you put anchovies on it? And they go, no. And because you have that trust internally and you're managing risk from external. When we think of DevSecOps, at least in my concept, it's the idea of embedding security into the developer experience. And when I talk of the developer experience, I'm trying to engage that as being much further than, ops teams or further than, the software development lifecycle, because a lot of the pieces that fit into our current IT landscape don't really fit nicely into a software development lifecycle box or a specific box around one part of provisioning IT. So if we think about, IAM roles that we maybe provision on top of an identity provider, well, is that part of your software delivery lifecycle? Possibly not. You might be putting it in a pipeline to deliver a process of putting security into it, but it's not going to be part of that. And so what we really start to look at is chunking things down into being more about, communication and people, strategy and process, and tools and technology. Generally speaking, when you go and talk to someone and they say DevSecOps, I talk about tools and technology, because that's really where the people get very excited about, especially if you're a seller of security software. Generally speaking, your piece of security software is going to fix everyone's problems, right? There are no internal problems at all. There's no problems that could be better solved if I just told you there were anchovies in the pizza. No, we're going to have a tool so we can test all of our pizzas for traces of anchovy. And we can also think about the strategy and processes that we go through. So when we think of process, we're thinking of how things are being delivered. And when we're thinking of strategy, we're thinking kind of in a macro approach of how are we going to ensure that we can deliver security across the different items that we are running. When we think of kind of communication and people, and the reason I like to start with communication and people is that I think that without it, doesn't matter what else you do. You know, this is a fundamental part, is you are going to be working, trusting, risking with people in general. There is going to be some part you are not working in isolation, so you have to be able to understand how the communication and people is going to be helping to embed the security in your processes, in your organization, in your software, in your tools. You have to think about, you know, what are we actually doing and why are we doing it? You know, if there is something that... I love the idea of being a newbie into organisations, which I get to be as a consultant quite often, because I go in and I can ask really stupid questions that they think they've been solved. So I say, why does Andy have to approve everything? Oh, well, Andy's like the security guy. Does Andy go on holiday? Yeah, well, Andy has 15 days off a year, or whatever it is. He has 3 days off a year, it doesn't matter. What happens if Andy gets hit by a bus? Well, I haven't really thought about that. Well, you know, this is a bit of a stupid question, but could we not make it so that everyone could be Andy? Or, you know, the reason we're doing it is to try and make sure that we are secure, but surely that there has to be a purpose for you being secure in the first place. And how is it actually aligning then with the business goals and visions? Now that might be a consultant speak, but generally we think of, you know, we're going to have some high-level business goals and visions that need to be assigned to security. So if we're talking about customer success, we're talking about security to deliver, you know, that customer confidence and the confidence in our own internal operations that things are secure for everyone. So if we're talking about, you know, how we're going to reduce costs, well, how are we going to reduce costs with security in mind as well? And then we need to combine that with thinking about, you know, the people that we have, what they're going to need to do. If, for example, everyone is going to have to be Andy, you'll probably have to go through some concept of telling everyone they're going to have to be Andy, and Andy's going to have to look after everything, and so you're all going to look after everything. You know, what kind of training are these people going to have to go through to be able to embed that security into what you're doing? Now, we talked about trust earlier, and I could be a pizza maker and I could put these tiny little salty fish on things, but I don't know they're called anchovies. And you could still be allergic to them, and you could still be having an allergic reaction to the anchovies, and I just don't know what they're called. I'm sorry, I've never been told what an anchovy is. And also, who's going to own these things? Now, ownership at a smaller organisation is often a lot easier because you get to see people, and those people can own things in a much smaller way, and you can say, well, I know everyone in my organisation who owns everything. Now, you'll find that as you work at different organisations that grow at different rates and at different levels, you'll find that actually probably 30-40% of the tools and technologies will be unowned at any point, or will be owned by someone who doesn't really know very much about them. So let's say I left the company and I used to own all of the security process, and now my replacement owns all of the security process, and he's starting in 4 months' time, and therefore no one owns any of the security process. So when we say we've got a security problem, don't know. And that's why it's important to think of that process of having people who are going to own things, and that can be processes, it can be tools, it can be technologies, it can be training, has to be transferred as part of that security mindset. And we're really looking at, you know, how we can do, you know, other things like documentation. How are we going to do blogs? How are we going to communicate with people at a wider level? How good is our written communication for being able to say what we're doing? How good are our tools and technologies at being able to communicate what the problem is? Now, you can look at one of the scans that I've got up later, that's a scan of a container. It's Python latest. Python latest has about 400 issues inside it. And you tell me which of the issues is the important issues. There's about 15 tied to Python 3.9 being a critical problem. Is that the critical issue? Or do you need to go into every CVE? I'm going to look at every CVE and look what they are. So understanding from how that's communicated out, whether it's chat systems or looking at objectives, is important as part of embedding that early process of security. And if you don't have anyone to continue that as a journey, which we all kind of accept that security can only be a journey for us, then we won't have any way of delivering that extra value through a DevSecOps kind of mindset. And looking at people, then we've got, roles, ownership, how they're going to collaborate, how we're going to do recruitment. Do we need to look at specialist recruitment? Do we need to look at specialist training? And so we've got that whole concept of embedding security into the process of our IT organisation and really into the process of the business and building future value. Okay, so if we move then, we've got the people are the right people, the people are being trained in the right way, we have some owners for different things, and we've got this concept that we're going to be moving forward with DevSecOps as an idea. Now, we then start to look at what our strategy and our processes are. So when I think of strategy, it can be, I'm going to say, sometimes easier in smaller organisations than large organisations, because there will be multiple competing strategies often in large organisations, and because you are struggling with the communication, the collaboration at different points, it's where we get those differences of opinion. And how we can then fit that strategy to what our security strategy is going to be. And we've tied that security strategy to customer success. Customer success is part of what we're going to do. We're delivering it via delivering security for our customers, and therefore we have this as a strategy for decisions that we're going to tie ourselves to in the future. And then we need to look at how we're going to qualify and assess the values that that's going to bring. So as we look for different tools and technologies that may fit our strategy, we have to have a way of qualifying that against what we already have. So is this going to be reviewing via an architectural board for what tools and technologies are appropriate and what kind of strategies and platforms we're going to be using. And on the other side of the strategy, we kind of look at strategy being quite large in its function, and we can look at processes of being the way that we're actually starting to deliver that. And it can be delivering security anyway. What is our process for delivering training for people? Do we need to train every single person on being able to securely code? Is that part of what we think embedding security into our IT landscape is going to be? What new processes are we going to need? Because likely if you're taking on any tools or technologies, you're going to need some new process. There's going to be, how are you going to remediate things? Well, we expect people to remediate things in a certain time. How are we going to run things with updating them? How are we going to ensure that we can secure at every point of that pipeline, at every part of that landscape, and make sure that we're driving that culture through people? Now, generally speaking, when we're looking at strategy, we're then looking at the concept of standardization, some kind of standards that we expect people to follow, adhere to. We probably need some kind of way that we're going to enforce or at least advise of that standardization. We need to look at, the spreadsheets are there in security concept for doing risk acceptance and management. It's probably going to be a while before we get rid of all the spreadsheets. And if you deal with the security spreadsheets, you know what I mean about the spreadsheets. We need to think of how we're going to align this back into the business, because in general, we need to be aligning every function back into some kind of part of the business and business value. We look at inventory systems, so how we're going to be managing our landscape at a large level. If we've got 3,000 applications, how are we going to be managing inventories of applications as groups? because we can't manage them, probably can't manage them individually. And then we look at, as a strategy, you have strategic partners. So those strategic partners can be, people that you onboard for a short time to assist with DevSecOps. They can be people that you view as, strategic partners that are implementing tools and technologies for you. It can be a whole range of different things that align with that future strategy that's kind of generally a long-term journey and looks at the macro level. And then when we think of the processes that we're going through, we're really starting to think about, how are we going to get approval from security? How are we going to run code reviews? How are we going to enforce, advise, tell people that we have SLAs or SLOs? What are we looking at for remediation? How are we managing tickets and issues? How are we doing project management? So one of the biggest failings that I regularly see is the concept of you raise a security issue and it then goes into a backlog of someone who says, we're going to plan to fix this. We haven't got time in the next sprint, but the sprint after this will definitely fix this security issue. And for me, that always thinks of well, how would you fix something like a P1? How do you fix a P2? How do you fix a P3? Do you need to then triage those issues early on? And that's all about a process. It's not about a specific tool or technology specifically. It's about that security process and being able to deliver a concept that you're pushing that forwards. And then lastly, I think we need to start thinking about the tools and technology. So after you've established that you've got some way of communicating with some people and you have some idea that you're going to have a strategy and you know that you need some processes, then we can start looking at, the really trendy things like tools and technologies and saying, how are we going to secure our control plane, or how are we going to, run container scanning on top of our clusters to ensure that we are isolating potential perimeter threats. I had to get someone to tell me what EDR was. EDR recently. There was a conference, security conference, a bunch of things. I was like, what's EDR? They were like, well, go and fix your Terraform. You're not touching my Terraform. Interesting concept. But we're always moving forward with these ideas of tools and technologies. And it's why if you haven't established the first two, then you cannot possibly either make a selection of tools or make an appropriate use of technology. And really what we're doing, therefore, is looking at what tools do we need to execute what we've already established, not how we're going to buy this tool and then use it to execute and use some new processes. We're thinking about that in the kind of the wrong direction, and how are we going to be able to assess the requirements of the tools against the requirements that we've got for communication, collaboration, training for people, looking at strategies and processes. And when we think about what technologies we have, we need to understand what kind of things we're going to need to support. The technology choices that we're making enable us to support what we're going to do, and what kind of future technologies do we believe that we're going to need, because everyone's going to need future things. At least I hope everyone needs future things. Some people maybe will still be in the COBOL cowboys. Someone was telling me about the COBOL cowboys. I don't know if they maybe made it up, that there was a group of I'm going to say gentlemen in their 60s in the US who go around like fixing COBOL problems, because there's very few people who can go and fix those COBOL problems, and they're branded themselves the COBOL cowboys. Ride into town, fix the problems. 3 weeks later, they leave again. I like that as a concept. I'm not good enough on COBOL, but I'm not. Do we have cowboys in the UK? Would it be like a COBOL Morris man? Is that an appropriate turn up in town, hit some sticks, have some hankies, and then leave again? So when we're thinking of tools, we're thinking of trendy things like SAST and DAST, vulnerability management, container scanning, dependency management, secrets management, policy as code. We could probably write a list of, you could probably do a presentation on one of these things that lasted for about 15 years. So all of the tools that we're generally looking at in that DevSecOps concept is falling into something like these. There are slightly other tools that wouldn't fit onto this slide because for this animation you can only do 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 things. The 8th one disappeared. Yes. Okay, so SAST, static application security testing, DAST, dynamic application security testing. So generally thinking static is we're just reading the code and probably applying some patterns or rules against that. Dynamic, we're starting the application and then testing against it. So that would normally then mean that you can do any kind of dynamic testing like, I don't know, API testing or fuzz testing or penetration testing on top of an application. Vulnerability management, generally we're thinking about known vulnerabilities for vulnerability management, container scanning containers. Dependencies are looking at like an SBOM, so software bills and materials. Very useful if you had problems with Log4j. Secrets management is obviously looking at how we're going to manage secrets, whether that is, I'm including in secrets things like keys, things like certificates, things like usernames, passwords, and the cycling of that. And policy as code, generally we're thinking about tools that are going to help us manage our policies through a codification of policy. Codification, real word? Sounds like a real, I'm sure I've used it on a slide before. And then when we think of technologies, we're thinking about coding languages we're supporting, infrastructure as code languages that we're supporting. I've separated them out because other people have been separating them out for me recently in saying that we run, we've got .NET and we've got Python, we've got JavaScript and we've got Java and we've got COBOL. No one's got COBOL. But, and then infrastructure as code, they're saying we've got a whole different tool set for that. Generally, you probably will have a whole different tool set between coding languages and infrastructure as code languages. We can look at what our CI platform is. CI platform might be part of the version control system. You see I've got a bag, I've got my GitLab Hero bag. So yeah, we've got that one. And cloud platform, generally I'm thinking what cloud platform would be looking at public cloud platforms probably, although I'm hoping that the word cloud platform also means that you could be running VMware or something if you wanted to. Okay, so I'm going to look at a few things in action, hopefully if I can manage to seamlessly transition to a browser on a Windows machine. And hopefully that starts to drive home some of the points and makes it that these things are not just Will talking about things in the abstract, but Will talking about things in the concrete. Is that the opposite to the abstract? There sounds like there should be a better word for abstract and concrete. That doesn't sound like the proper, does anyone know Latin? Abstract, is that a Latin word? Sounds Latin, like obstruct, or obstruct isn't. Ibstruct, abstract and ibstruct. It's how words are made up, right? So if enough people decided that they wanted to use that as the opposite to abstract, then it would work. So all I need to do is, all of the people in here, you now need to go and put that into an email tomorrow and say, I just don't want to make this too obstructed. And then we can have a new word. And you could claim that you were there and you helped invent it. Okay. How do I get off this? Is it there? Oh, yes. Now I can't see it. How do I make these screens share to each other?
Windows P.
Windows P.
Should give you options to
Yes, you're right. I've lost the mouse now. Duplicate. Yes, that looks better. That one. Oh, I can see. Brilliant. Okay, so what I wanted to do is to start at the very start, which is a very good place to start. I think that was Julie Andrews who said that. Mary Poppins? Mary Poppins? No. What's the other one? Sound of Music? Yes. So I'm getting all the quotes in. Sound of Music. I'll be able to tell my wife I dropped a quote to the Sound of Music. She'll be very impressed. So we've got like what I think is like a simple project here. It's running in GitLab because I find it easiest to run things in GitLab. And sometimes you might see projects similar to this. We have an app that has some application code in. We have a Terraform directory that has some Terraform in. We've got a Docker file. We've got a README. A README is the default README that you get inside GitLab. So that could totally be a project, right? But in terms of applying some of the DevSecOps things that I've talked about already, that's like a terrible project. So if we started off with saying, well, actually, we're going to have some merge requests. We're already starting to win. If we've got merge requests, we can have code review. If we have code review, then we can trust each other that we're actually going to review it, and I'm going to assign you to look at it. And so our risk level is reduced because our trust level is increasing by sharing it with other people internally, generally. So I'm going to look at what I like to start with, which is documentation. Now, I'm actually slightly pedantic about documentation, and I'm sure I don't come across as a very pedantic person, but I totally am pedantic about documentation. And it's because it becomes often the documentation that you write is the thing that will well outlast both the application code, the Terraform code. It is the kernel of the idea that you're actually trying to start with in a project. So if we think about the documentation that we had for this project when we looked at it, absolutely terrible. README tells me nothing about the project, absolutely nothing. It doesn't look like it's owned by anyone. There is nothing about how I expect other people to write code on it, how I expect other people to review code on it. There is nothing about a license on it. So who knows what the license is? If you don't have licenses on your project, you probably should, even if they're commercial licenses when you're using them internally. So we've started out with what I think really simple things to start with, which is people prefer, I'm not going to run Gitpod, I'm going to run in Web IDE. I was going to say I'll run Gitpod, but I'm not on my machine. Gitpod is great. I don't know if anyone's used Gitpod, like VS Code in the browser, but you're able to install whatever things you want. So I've gone through and created inside here a changelog. I've made a changelog. Now the magic thing about changelogs is that I now get to write what I'm changing on projects. So the next person who comes along can see like the history of the project without having to try and guess what I've done from a bunch of tickets maybe in Jira or a bunch of commits that I've badly named because I've already left the company. Doesn't matter, I've already left the company. I've also written in here how I'm expecting people to contribute to the project. Now, you run, like, if you're involved or look at, everyone uses open source projects. The difference between an open source project that tells people how to contribute and the difference that as an open source project that doesn't tell people how to contribute is that no one contributes to ones that people don't tell them how to contribute to, or you make it really hard. Now, if we can make the concept of contributing to that project easier, we're not only extending ourselves way on beyond that way of working, so I am extended for 24 hours a day because I've written a contributing, but we're also telling people how we're expecting them to do releases, how we're expecting them to run through a developer flow, how we're expecting them to write things. Hopefully people can't see this at all, right? Maybe what I would do is, I'll make it so that you can see it, or hopefully so that you can see it. Control-C, Control-V still works, right? Not IDE. No. How do I do double click? Why is that a number pad? Why can't I type someone else's keyboard? Okay, I'm back round again, I think. Right, we'll switch then into the branch so people can... Oh no, the number pad's taken over. Okay, hopefully we're back. So, we can see now that in this, we've got at least some README We say this is a project called Starting DevSecOps. It says getting started, review the merge requests on the left-hand side to see what they are, which is actually about the project. Contributing, this is what you need to contribute. This is what changed recently. We've got a maintainer and we've got a license at the bottom. So you could probably, from this project, not know me at all and come on and make some changes to it. And you could then say, well, I'm going to assign them to Will. Will's going to review them. We've already probably, is 100% a good security amount to Moresby? I was going to say 200%, but then 200% of what? It doesn't really, it's abstract in our figures. So just by putting documentation in, we've made the project more secure. There's no tools, special tools in here. Literally, I've just written about things and I've made myself the owner. But it means that in the future, we've got a problem with this. Will's the maintainer. This is how we expect you to contribute. This is how we expect you to work on this project. So it really works on that kind of communication and people factor. Now, the next merge request that I will open it in a not a black background. Can I open it in not a black background one? Maybe. Now we're testing my my brain power for can I turn this into light so that people can see it. Light. This is a good game, isn't it? You get to see me. Okay, so what you can start to see in this change is that we're actually building a bunch of the tools into what we're doing. We can see from my pipeline that I've got something that's SAST, we've got something that's build, we've got something that's scan, we've got something that's review. So we're actually starting to put the tools in, and it's because we've thought, well, I do need a SAST. I'm going to just use some tools to be able to scan things. I don't really want to make it terribly difficult for people. So we're going to scan these things. It's going to tell us if we've got any problems in our application code. So when I look at the SAS job, we can see that I've got both semgrep running, which is an application code scanner, and Chekhov running, which is a Terraform scanner. So you could pick these up pretty much and apply them into any CI platform you want. There's no special customization, but we now have a way of actually testing what we're doing. So we are statically testing both our language types in our projects, and we're going to output them just onto a command line back out so people can see them. We can also see that we've got in here, I'm going to skip the build just builds the container. We've got a scan that's using Trivy as a scanner, so we've got some container scanning. It's not particularly challenging. We've just gone and picked Trivy as a container scanner. You're going to choose anyone you want. I don't mind. This is not the purpose of this, is not to say that you have to do a specific one or not, but we have some scanning in here. And so what we're doing is now we're starting to build on top of what we already have. We say, well, we're going to also scan the container that we've got, because that's an easy way of being able to start embedding that as an idea. Now what we've done is we've put in the communication and people piece at the start, and now we're thinking about the whole of this pipeline is the process of software delivery, how we're expecting people to secure their software going forwards. And the tools and technology are forming part of that as we fall out the back. So we're saying, well, I've written some application code, I'd like to scan some application code. I'm going to go and look through tools. I think semgrep fits the tool that I want quite well. Or I've written some Terraform, I've chosen Chekhov because Will said that Chekhov was better. It doesn't really matter, but we're looking at that from a concept of moving from people to strategy to process to tools and technology. What we get to see from a concept in terms of our pipeline, as we think of that pipeline in the merge request, is that things are actually moving through a pipeline. So our process is then associated with securing things as we go between different areas. Now you see there's some failures in here, and maybe we don't mind that there's some failures in here. And that's quite a good thing for our project, because failures actually start to mean that we have something that we can work on from a security perspective. So we're actually seeing that there are failures available, which means that part of our process is working for finding security problems, and generally speaking, finding security problems way before they become an actual problem in production. They're part of that developer experience. Now, you'll also see that We've got one on the end that's danger, and danger is one of my new favourite things for making that people and communication part even wider, because you'll see that if we went back to look at the merge request I made, merge requests are the same as pull requests in other tools. You can actually see that Will has included a comment to himself that I've actually got an error. You've got an error because you haven't put a description in what you do. So I've started to codify part of the process of making that documentation to actually deliver better collaborative ways of working, and starting that process of running through DevSecOps, which is embedding security in the process of our developer experience. And this kind of developer experience, you can go and look and find this in open source projects quite a lot, where there are helpers about the pull requests that you make. Now, I'm going to quickly flick back to what does PowerPoint look like.
One question.
Yes.
So security, as in the app, the code security or app security, right? The alerts, danger, and all that came for code, or is it?
So danger is, I'm actually using the one written in Ruby. Hopefully we'll be able to see. So that I've written a danger file. Basically, the danger file reads the merge request and does things on the merge request. So you'll see the top one basically says, if the GitLab merge request title includes the words whip or draft, then put a warning in saying this is a draft merge request. So it's reading the merge request, or you can get it to do pull requests if you chose to. So it's codifying how I'm expecting people to contribute into projects. Now, you might find at a micro level, this is people management. But at a macro level, this enables you to standardize how you're going to work across thousands of projects, which is really useful for managing standardization and security as a concept. So you can make it that people have to put security rules in, that they have to tell you how they're contributing, that they have to have approval and reviews, that people have to approve things before they go through. Okay. And I'm on... Oh, I've got 4 of these up. Which one was I on? That one? I'll just stay on here because I know where I'm going. So, then we get to what I love. It's one of my favourite quotes is Donald Rumsfeld, which is obviously speaks about Rumsfeldian knowledge. Rumsfeldian, real word? What do you reckon? I think real word. So you can also use this one, Rumsfeldian knowledge. That really it's about starting to look at where our unknown unknowns are, in terms of once we've solved the problems of our known knowns, our known unknowns, our unknown knowns, then we've only got our unknown unknowns to work on. And generally our known knowns are going to be our people, our unknown knowns are going to be our tools and technologies, and our known unknowns are going to be our strategy and process. And really what I'm looking for people to take away, that really security is a team activity, that you have to communicate and collaborate for success in DevSecOps. There is no alternative. You need to help people to understand what security is and what it means to them. Find processing and strategies that are going to match those goals that you're working through. As much as possible, when you can automate, do automate. I'm automating my merge request feedback for people as much as possible. And there is a maturity model that I included here from AWS about maturity in AWS around DevSecOps or security maturity. Security maturity. Oh, I can't believe I didn't use that phrase earlier. Okay, that's it. If anyone has any questions, I'd love some questions. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to stick around all the time because my wife has another meeting to go to at 8 o'clock that I have to drive my motorbike home for. But yeah, if anyone does have any questions, then I'd love to answer them. Now, I felt like someone was going to say something, and then they didn't.
Right.
Thank you.
And this is my experience. this sort of thing is very easy to set up from the start. In the same way that using an IDE that guides you through writing code is very easy to start with a blank slate. But if you have very large, very mature, very old code base and infrastructure, applying this can be exponentially difficult because the thing just blows up and you basically just get lost in the noise. I mean, I forget how many Rubocop noise errors we get on our code base, but it's still like 20,000 errors on one project. There's no way anyone's ever going to read that. And we know there aren't serious problems, to be honest.
I mean, I would say...
So the question really is, what you've shown is an example of how this works from scratch. How do you implement this in a mature organisation that already has, God knows how much rubbish accumulated over decades?
I would say how it works from scratch is how it works from scratch. If your suggestion is that at the moment that security is not a priority, then you need to sell security as a priority to people because it's tied to a customer value in general. So if you can't market it and you can't sell it to people, they're not going to do it. You can give them every tool in the world, they just ignore it. So if you can't make it that people see the value in doing it, that really is about communication and people, nothing to do with the tools, nothing to do with the process. You just need to sell it, and then you need to sell it again, and you need to sell it again, and you need to find champions who are going to sell it for you, and it's the only way of extending that through a large mature organisation is to get people to keep selling it and keep tying it back to something the company wants to do. And you're right, I think it's why if you go and buy some tools and technology, you can't ever really embed that through the organisation because people don't understand why they've even got it, and they ignore Rubocop or they ignore things because we know that the security is fine, and generally you don't know that the security is fine. You think that because the security was fine yesterday, the security is probably fine today. That's probably the thing I'd say. From scratch, that works well. It probably works better from not scratch, that you have to go back and talk to people and get them to communicate, collaborate, train them, establish that path. And then you work with them for building on how can we make Rubocop better for you as a developer experience? How can I make it better? We can't go from 20,000. Well, how do we make it that the output of it is filtered? How do we make it that, let's say today is fine, let's find the 20,001 error. We'll say that's the new error because that's the new error. Fix that error. Then tell everyone you fixed the error and you're going to fix every other error. Probably. It's not easy.
Yeah, I mean, SonarQube actually does that. It filters existing versus changed errors.
Yeah.
So at least we can make sure it doesn't get any worse.
But if you can't convince people to do it, they see 20,000, and you see 20,001, 200,000, so it becomes irrelevant to them. Go.
Where do you sort of see the boundaries of DevSecOps in terms of like a lot of the examples that we see are all around like securing the application itself and verifying the supply chain of the application, but more and more I sort of see supply chain attacks that take your CI infrastructure or something, or your package management system. Do they, in your opinion, kind of fall under the realms of DevSecOps, or is that like a separate discipline?
So I was careful to not use the word applications in my first one and say about the developer experience, because I think that increasingly that's what we're looking at embedding security in, because it's not about applications per se, it's about that developer experience. It is about how people write code, how people get feedback, how they understand if we're talking about supply chain attacks, how they understand their supply chain, because that's part of their experience is to use a supply chain. And if they can't understand that it is not secure, so if you've got nothing, let's say you haven't told anyone it could be insecure, and you've got no tools to scan the supply chain, well then they will just continue as is because their experience is not facilitated in that way. So I would probably say I'm increasingly believing that DevOps is being split into platform engineering and developer experience. So that's probably what I'd say is that as we nicheize things more, that there is probably a split coming. But that's why I say about developer experience rather than about applications, because I think there is so much more, but we are often turning them into codifiable problems in general, because it is how we know that we can automate them best, if they're codifiable. And for the other bits, we have people. Hopefully we have people.
And talk for any more? Cool, well, thanks a lot, Will.
Thank you.